All right. Happy Monday morning, everybody. I know you aren't watching these live, but we're here on a Monday morning continuing the On the Hot Seat interviews with me, Hosam. And today we are very fortunate to have with us Pat Nikolai, who is running for Chief of Police. We're having a lot of fun with these interviews. I'm having a lot of fun with these interviews, and I'm sure when you start to watch them, once they're made available online, you're going to have a whole lot of fun watching them as well. As I've been doing with the other videos, I'm just going to recap the rules, the format and the rules, and then we're going to jump straight into talking with Pat today. And just as a recap for those of you who may not have seen some of the other videos, the format, basically, we're going to start in three sections. First section is to get to know the candidate. So, Pat will tell us about himself, could get him to know him on a more personal level. We'll play a little bit of an icebreaker game that helps us to get to know the candidate. The second part of the format or the interview is basically the pitch. And that's where the candidate will have an opportunity, Pat will have an opportunity to talk to us about his platform. Why should we vote for Pat? And he can get into his top issues. I've said top 2. Some people have gone more than top 2. That's okay, no problem. But again, he'll tell us why we should vote for him. And then the third part of the interview is the hot seat, where I get to ask the tough questions that's on everybody's minds, but nobody seems to be asking. So that's pretty much the format. We have 6 rules, and we're going to stick by those rules very strictly. Rule number 1, which is very unique to the hot seat, and that's there's no time limit. So Pat can go for as short as he wants or as long as he wants. I'm not going to rush him. I'm not going to cut him off. It's entirely up to him how much he wants to talk about. And, we've been in so many forums where, they have at most 2 minutes per answer. So really the beauty here of the hot seat is that the candidate gets to talk for as long or as short as they want. Rule number 2 is that it's going to be a casual conversation. That means that we can have a discussion. I can ask Pat to elaborate further. I can challenge him on some of his thoughts and ideas. I can probe him on some additional follow-up questions. It's a casual conversation, and you're going to see as we go along that it really is a casual conversation. Number 3, that the candidate's opponent will not be present, and as you've probably seen in other videos, and as you can tell from the size of this room, it's a pretty small room, and Pat and I are the only ones here in this room. There are other people in the office today because it is a Monday, but certainly his opponent is not here in the room. Rule number 4, I'm going to ask a whole bunch of questions that are specific to Pat. Now, obviously, with the role of Chief of Police, there are common questions or common themes that would be shared that I would have asked both candidates, but a whole bunch of questions are going to be specific to Pat. Between that and these not being live and not being posted even until I've completed the interviews, it doesn't disadvantage or advantage any candidates based on the order for which they interview. So it's completely fair. And because, again, a lot of the questions are specific to the candidate, it doesn't even really make a difference. Again, it's specific to the candidate, so it's not anything about their opponent. Number 5, the candidates are allowed to have any sort of physical notes and papers that they want to bring. I see Pat has his notepad with possibly some notes in it. With regards to electronic devices, for the other candidates, I am limiting the use of electronic devices such that I need to be able to make sure that they're not receiving fed answers. But with the interviews for Chief of Police, I have strictly said no electronic devices at all, and clearly Pat doesn't have that. And rule number 6, which is also a very, very important rule, and I do strictly abide by this rule, and I have actually acted on this rule a few times already with some of the candidates that I've interviewed, and that is that you are not allowed to talk about your opponent. So this is an opportunity for us to learn why we should vote for you, not why we shouldn't vote for your opponent. This is an opportunity for us to learn why you are good for the city of Santa Clara, not why your opponent is bad. And, as I said, there's no time limit. I won't cut off and I won't rush anybody for time, but I will cut the candidate off respectfully if they do start to talk about their opponent. Okay, so those are the 6 rules. I think Pat's very familiar with them because he and all the candidates have received them in email before agreeing to do this interview. And with that, we are going to go ahead and point the camera to Pat. What's up, Pat? How are you doing?
I'm doing well.
Your weekend was all right?
It was very nice. A little busy.
I'm sure it is, good. Especially with election season and everything that's going on.
Yes, it was.
It's going to continue to get busy and busier until the election season is over, I'm sure. So,
very true. Very true.
Pat, tell us about, who is Pat Nikolai? Tell us about yourself.
Okay. Well, I grew up in South San Jose and actually moved from the Midwest, and I quickly acclimated to California. So much so that when we went back to visit relatives back east in the dead of winter, I quickly realized I do not want to go back.
Where back east? Sorry.
Actually went to we went back to the Midwest, so okay. Minnesota and Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Oh, because I come from the East Coast, so I was just wondering. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess it was Midwest more than the East, but yeah, those winters were brutal, and the summers were just as bad with the humidity and the mosquitoes that were about this big.
Yeah.
But so I moved out here and grew up in South San Jose, attended schools, actually went to Archbishop Mitty High School. So I went there and then went down to Cal Poly. So I attended Cal Poly for 3 years and then came up here and actually got hired almost immediately after I left Cal Poly. I started a family early and I got hired at Santa Clara PD. And so I've been at Santa Clara PD now for 25 years. And what I liked about Santa Clara was at the time it was by far the best agency. It was the preeminent agency in the county and I would argue in the state. So that's why I wanted to come here. And I actually moved into Santa Clara to be part of the community. And so I've moved around Santa Clara. I've actually rented an apartment. I've rented a house. I've owned a house. And so I currently own a house in the Old Quad neighborhood in one of those old Victorian homes. And I really love it here. So I've been here 24 years, just a part of the community. So, you know, you asked how the weekend was. So actually on Sunday we had the Sister Cities barbecue. So my wife and I are part of Sister Cities, and so we actually had the chicken barbecue yesterday at the Elks Lodge. Good news is the Elks Lodge let us move inside because usually we're on the patio, especially with the weather the way it was. But it was a really good event. It was well attended. And you know, the bottom line about the Sister Cities is it's for the kids. It's to get the kids to interact with other cultures, which is so wonderful. So that's kind of, you know, very briefly who I am and what I'm about. And
tell me something that most people don't know about you. I mean, something you're willing to share, obviously. But I mean, what is something that most people don't know about Pat?
Let's see. How about I love doing crossword puzzles. That is one of my big things. I love getting the newspaper, and it's just to get the crossword puzzle. I love doing that. And then for recreation, I play roller hockey. And I am not very good at it, but I really enjoy it, and it's a lot of fun. Actually, one of my sons plays hockey, and so we have a little friendly competition. He is much better than I am, but it's a lot of fun.
Your sons, what about your family?
My family. So I have 2 adult children from my first marriage, and they live in the Sacramento area. And then with my new wife, Tidra, we have 2 children as well. And they actually are both in college right now. So the oldest, Tyler, who plays hockey, he is at San Diego State. He's a junior. And Allie just got into Colorado State University, so she's a freshman there, quickly geting acclimated to college life.
Cool. Well, let's. I did forget to in the introduction, and I hate to move the camera away to do this, but actually we do have to thank Silos.com, which is the startup here in Santa Clara, who have graciously allowed us to use this meeting room in their offices. So check them out. I usually do that in the beginning, but I forgot it was on the table here, and I had forgotten to do it. So, Pat, with that, I think what we're going to do is we're going to jump into the Icebreaker game.
Okay.
It's I think you'll have a lot of fun with it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this camera over back here so that we can get both the screen and you. And let's see. I think that is good. All right, and let me move over here to the part in the computer so I can actually do it. All right. So the way the game works, Pat, is I'm going to pull up a picture, and you're going to tell me the first thought that comes to your mind. It doesn't have to be like a short, like one word, like the first word that comes to your mind, or, you know, there's a short phrase. It's just, you know, you can talk, elaborate on your thoughts, but don't try to rig it. You know what I mean? Don't try to be like, what's the most politically correct answer? No, just tell me what's on your mind. And I think a lot of people had a lot of fun with this. So
okay,
let's try this one.
Oh, it looks like it looks like a combination of like an American Indian profile. But it also kind of looks like one of those statues from Easter Island. Yeah, it's.
You don't see the lady in the coat or the person in the coat, in the jacket.
Oh yeah.
Well, I mean, people see it both ways.
I see it. I can see the kind of like an Eskimo almost facing away from the picture. Interesting.
Okay. Let's try one of these.
Okay, now I'm looking to try to see what the two things are.
Don't try to rig it.
Yeah,
Remember,
I think it looks like
it
looks like a bird. It looks like a bird's head.
Okay.
And I'm really trying to think what the other picture is, but I really see the bird's head.
You don't see the rabbit sideways, maybe.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Maybe.
Well, I'm
gonna go with definitely bird's head.
That's just to get you kind of warmed up here.
Okay.
We're gonna change it up. We're gonna switch it up a little bit here. Okay.
Oh, I see Leonardo DiCaprio, and I see him. He is such a good actor, and you see him in so many different roles. I remember watching just the other day. It was on TV. It was an old movie of his, the Quick and the Dead, and he looked like he was 12 in that movie. And then you see him in the Revenant, and then he looks like he's 50 years old. He is such a versatile actor. I really like how it seems like he can just get into a role and you forget about him as the actor. You just picture him in the role he's in.
Do you think he's unique as an actor like that? I mean, out of all the other actors, or I mean, you think that there's others that are as good as him?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of actors can do that, and I really think that's like Tom Hanks is another one. When you see a Tom Hanks movie, you're not watching Tom Hanks, you're watching the character he plays, and it's the same thing with Leonardo. It seems like you're not watching his movie, you're watching whatever movie he is presenting, and he has such a wide range. I mean, like I said, The Revenant.
Favorite movie, or
favorite movie that he is in?
Or favorite movie in general? It doesn't matter.
A movie.
You're into movies, yeah?
Yeah, I like movies. I always remember Star Wars.
Yeah?
The very first Star Wars. And it goes back to, being a kid when that came out. And I remember wanting to go see that so badly. And we had to wait because there were such long lines. And we had to wait and wait and wait. And by the time we finally got there, we actually went to the old Winchester theaters, the domes, and we had to wait in line forever still. And this had been out for a couple of months.
Wow.
And I remember going in, and it was a packed theater, and it was just, I mean, for the time, it was such an incredible movie. And really, it redefined movies moving forward.
Favorite episode?
Again, the first one.
The very first one?
The very first one. It just, it had everything. It had the, the good versus the evil, it's just, cut and dried, and you had all the different characters, and it was just such a fun movie.
How do you feel about episode 7, the new one?
The Force Awakens?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was good, and I liked it because to me, it kind of went back to the first movie. I think like the first 3 movies were obviously, I think, the best. Then the second 3 movies, it seemed like they got away from the story a little bit and got more into, what kind of special effects can we have? And this last one, again, it really got back to a story where you had the characters that you really were invested in, and, there was so many parallels to the first movie that, you'd think you knew what was going on, and then there would be a twist. And, I'm sorry, I did not see Han Solo getting killed in this movie. And it's a spoiler alert if you haven't watched it. If you haven't watched it yet.
If you haven't watched it by now, you probably aren't going to watch it.
You probably aren't going to watch it.
I think that's an okay spoiler. Do you cheer the dark side or the light side?
Well, you got to go for the Jedis. I mean, you got to root for the good guys. Yeah.
That's not a politically correct answer.
No, because
I tell you, my girls love Darth Vader.
Darth Vader. That is so funny. You know, the character I really liked was Finn. You know, because he was like, you know, he was the dark side, but then, you know, he wasn't, you know, he kind of turned into a good guy, but then he had all these, you know, qualms. He was scared. He didn't know what to do. So I really liked him. I thought it really helped drive the storyline.
That's a very interesting answer. I like it. I like it a lot. Let's do one more movie one. I think I'm having a lot of fun with the movie one.
Okay.
Let's do one more movie one.
Another actor that Al Pacino, Scarface, you know, the classic line, "Say hello to my little friend." I mean, that probably gets said at least once a week, if not once a day, at the police department.
No kidding. I really picked the right movie then, huh?
You really picked a great movie. But again, Al Pacino is a character, an actor where he's been doing it for so long that he just immerses himself into the role. You know, one of my favorite movies with Al Pacino is Scent of a Woman, where he's, do you know that one?
No, I haven't watched that one.
So he is...
I'm a little younger than you.
Just a little bit. But in Scent of a Woman, he is a military veteran who is now blind, and he ends up getting together with I think it's a college student who's going to a private school, and basically it's like his last hurrah, because he is obviously planning on committing suicide, and because he is just fed up with being blind in the whole life. And so there is, you know, obviously a lot of emotional drama in it. Turns out the boy gets in trouble at school, and, you know, Al Pacino has to come and basically act as his parents and defend him in a courtroom scene almost. And he's blind the whole time. And he's blind the whole time, and it's just riveting. You know, his speech to the group basically, of course, sways everybody, but it's a very powerful message. But it also has, you know, the comic in it. So he goes with the boy to get a Ferrari to test drive, and then actually test drives the Ferrari as a blind person. Wow. And they get pulled over by a cop. And it's a little, you know, funny because the police officer doesn't realize he's blind. And but again, another great actor.
Oh shoot! Not yet. So sometimes, by the way, when I click, like, it scrolls just before I hit click.
Right.
That is a little messed up. But anyways.
So Snickers versus Hershey. I'm going to go with the Hershey's.
Really?
Really. And the reason I'm going with Hershey's is s'mores. You ever had a s'more?
Yeah, of course.
S'mores are incredible. And you cannot make a s'mores with a Snickers bar.
Have you tried?
I have not tried, but I just don't think it would work.
So why would you say you couldn't make it?
I guess I'm a traditionalist.
Well, now you're going to try it, aren't you?
I will probably have to try it now. Maybe with one of those little mini Snickers.
Yeah.
It might not be bad.
Especially with all the nougat in there and everything.
Right. But
I always loved it now. I never thought of that.
I always loved the Hershey bars. They were like this one, where they came in the little pieces, and you could break off the little pieces, and it was, you know, easy to share. You could crack it off, and, you know,
you share.
Well, maybe with my wife.
Okay. I don't share with anybody. I'll buy a second one, but I'm not sharing mine. All right. Let's go with this
one. American flag. I mean, it just represents our, you know, it represents our country, and I really, you know, I don't think I'm overly patriotic, but I love everything that this country stands for. And, you know, there's good and there's bad. And people protest against the country. They protest against the flag. And that's really one of the great things about this country is you can do that because we have those freedoms to be able to do that kind of thing. And so, you know, I like everything that the flag represents. And even if someone wants to protest, that's what this country represents. And, you know, when you have, you know, things like the, you know, democracy and the election process, obviously what we're going through right now, it's, you know, there's good and there's bad about elections, but the bottom line is the people get to vote and the people get to decide. And when you look at other parts of the world, that's just not the case. And I just think that's wonderful.
All right. I like that.
Oh, it's the Veterans Memorial
Yes.
at Central Park.
Yeah.
And what I see is, what I notice like there is, the flag there is at half staff.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an unfortunate thing that happens a lot of times, is the flag is flown at half staff because of all the, bad things that are happening, unfortunately, all the deaths. But what I think this represents is great, because it's all the veterans that have sacrificed to going back to that first flag. I mean, the veterans, they've put their lives on the line to make sure that we have a country where you can protest. And, even when people protest against veterans, they're still, so respected because of what they've done, what they've accomplished, in order to let those people protest. And another thing about the Veterans Memorial that makes me think a little bit about work is, we have a lot of great officers that have come from the military. And so, I have a deep respect for the military. I didn't serve in the military, but a lot of my coworkers did serve. And when you hear them talk and you hear about their, the camaraderie they built up during their time in service, it's wonderful to hear. And they've turned into great officers. So, for me personally, the military has been beneficial because it's brought me a lot of great friends and coworkers at the department. Firefighter. So we always joke, we always have a little competition between the police and firefighters. And it's funny because, when I talked about sister cities, so when kids from either Coimbra or Isimo come to visit, one of the days they always do is they always go to the police department and the fire department. And depending on who they go to first, we always make sure the kids ask the next group, why are they better than you? And it's always a running joke. And the firefighters, they love saying, what do policemen and firemen have in common? And they both wanted to be firemen when they grew up.
That's awesome.
So, but over the years, I have gotten to have a great relationship, with being the association president. So I've worked closely with the Firefighters Association. So I have gotten a much closer relationship, probably, than a lot of the other police officers. So I know them personally, and it's fun. I mean, when you go to a meeting with them and they call you Brother Nikolai because you're part of their family, that makes you feel good. So I have the utmost respect for the firefighters, and we joke about it because everybody loves the firemen, and nobody loves the police officers, but really they're part of the public safety family, and the city would not function without them.
Oh, not that. See, we already did movies and actors. I'm not gonna. Again, when I click, sometimes it doesn't.
It just goes.
Yeah, let's do it this way. There you go.
Okay, it's for the front of the police department. And, that's obviously why we're here today, is, talking about the future of the police department. And I really, I'm sure we'll go into this more, but, I really believe that I'm, the right choice to lead the police department forward. What I love about this is just this new facility. It's, it's not brand new, but it's obviously newer than what we had before. And it's an incredible facility. But it's going to need to grow. And we need to figure out now, how are we going to grow this facility? Because I don't know if it's big enough for what we have coming.
You mean physically, like
physically,
actually, like the
actual
building itself?
I mean, simple things like our locker room. I mean, we are getting close to having all of our lockers used up. Wow. It's just a simple thing like that. Is where are we going to put more lockers? So that's the kind of thing we need to look at going forward. The other great thing about the building is you can see in this little section down here. That's kind of where the the dispatchers. We moved into the dispatchers into our building where they used to be in a basement, and it's great because now they are part of our family, and they're not kind of the forgotten group in a whole other building. They're part of our family. So I think that's an important part of the building.
All right, we're gonna switch gears here.
I don't recognize that.
you want me to help you a little bit?
Well, let me take a stab at it, okay? Yeah, it's the logo of the 49ers. And, you know, there's been obviously a lot of the dialogue in this campaign, and not just the police chief campaign, but all of the campaigns in Santa Clara have revolved around the 49ers. And, you know, they're good, bad, or otherwise. You know, the bottom line is what I think we need to realize is, you know, the 49ers are here, and they're not going anywhere. So we need to figure out how to work with them. So, I mean, a couple of things about that is we need to realize they are a business. They are a business just, I mean, obviously a little bit different, but they're like Intel. You know, they're in the business of making money. So I don't think people should get upset when they are trying to make the most money possible. What I think has been lacking on the city side is there hasn't been, you know, the kind of the counterpart to that, where there hasn't been the city person who is working actively to make sure that the city's best interests are protected. If you have just, you know, if you have these two parties and you have one group that is trying to make the most money possible and you don't have anyone advocating for the city, then there's going to be conflict. And I think that's what we see right now. And I think that's really what's driving a lot of the, you know, specifically a lot of the council races, but even to a degree the police chief's race, because there is a difference in philosophy between, you know, and I won't go into his, you know, but there's a difference in philosophy at how the 49ers should be acting and what we should hold them responsible for.
Let's do this one.
Mercury News. Again, I'm old-fashioned in that I love getting a paper. Sunday morning, I get up, I make a pot of coffee, I go get a paper, and I just love the feel of a newspaper in my hands. And again, doing things like the crossword puzzle, it's, you know, I remember it goes back to my, you know, my childhood as a little kid when I'd look in and see my dad, and he'd be sitting on the couch reading, or sitting in his bed reading the newspaper in the morning while we were getting up and going to church. And I was like, oh, I want to read the paper.
But you weren't reading the paper.
I wasn't reading the paper.
You were either crosswording or comics.
Exactly. You know, but so the newspaper itself, I love, and I really think that, you know, the Mercury News is, you know, some people think it's, you know, obviously biased one way or the other, but for local news, I really think it's one of the best sources we have. They, you know, obviously they have some biases, just like any other publication. But when you look at most of the reports, they're fairly accurate. It seems like. I mean, we specifically, when we look at, you know, police-related things, where I know the details and then I'll read about it in the paper. Sometimes they're off, sometimes they're, you know, pretty accurate. So it's interesting to see. And again, they, you know, in the police chief's race, they haven't really been too involved. There's been a couple of columns, but I don't even know if they're going to make an endorsement like they just did for the council seats. I know they just did endorsements for the council seats, but I don't know if they're even going to do that for the police chief's race. Blupac. Again, I'm a little bit familiar with this. I might have seen one or two items about this recently.
This is the hot seat. I'm going to start to crank things up a little bit, okay?
Good. Yeah, I think it's pretty obvious that the Blupac group has a very specific agenda. And looking at the people they are supporting, you know, candidates who are pro-49er. And by pro-49er, I mean the candidates that seem to align themselves with, again, the 49ers way of doing business, which is let's make the most money possible. I know from what I've read, there's no direct tie to the Blupac, to the 49ers. There is conjecture. And when you look at it, you know, you look at all the evidence, everything seems to point to the fact that, yes, the 49ers are involved. And again, it makes sense to me that the 49ers would be involved in this election. I mean, they are a huge corporation. They are in this city. And again, they are trying to make money. So, of course, the 49ers are going to want a pro-49er council. I mean, that just makes sense to me. You know, the only thing that I don't approve is, if it is the 49ers that are doing it, I don't approve of the way they're doing it. You know, they should be out publicly saying, here's the candidates we support, and giving the money directly to those candidates. Again, the way it looks like they funneled money into the Blupac, who then funneled money to a real political action committee that made contributions on behalf of those 4 candidates. The other really disappointing thing about this is the text messages and the polls that have gone out. And when you talk about politics, there's good politics and there's bad politics. And the bad politics, I think, is when you start doing smear campaigns and things that are not appropriate, are not relevant to the election. And I think that's what some of those texts and messages have been doing. And that really is what gives politics a bad name. I mean, you can, there's a difference between a positive and a negative campaign. And then there's a negative campaign, and then there's a low campaign. And by that I mean, is if you are pointing out a fact that is negative, well, it's a fact, and it's a negative, it is what it is. But if you attack someone's family or their personality or make baseless allegations, that's the kind of thing that needs to stay out of politics completely.
Speaking of politics.
So when you look at the national level, it's really disappointing that things have gotten so ugly. And that's something that that's something that I wish that we were able to eliminate, in that we should be focused on issues and just facts, not personality, not attacks. And at the national level, again, it's funny because depending on what site you look at or which TV news you look at, after a debate, some will say one side won, and you go to another side, and it's like they watched a completely different debate because they say the other side won. And so it's really hard to get, just the facts, because there's so many personal attacks. And, that's why I really, I would like to see more issues as opposed to, all of the personal attacks, because that just detracts from, who you're going to elect at a national level. So the Kaepernick protest, this was a very hot issue in Santa Clara, and it generated a lot of media hype. And I think part of the issues were how it was represented that the POA, the Police Officers Association, responded. So when I didn't mention it, but I was, the POA president for 14 years. And so I stepped down in order to run for office. So I was not part of the decision-making process on drafting a letter to the 49ers. So, but the POA drafted a letter to the 49ers and basically said they were disappointed. And they weren't disappointed in his actions. Again, this goes back to the American flag. He has a right to protest. If he feels that kneeling during the anthem is going to help get a message, then I encourage him to do it. But what I know the POA was upset about, and I was too personally as well, were the comments that he had made, specifically that, police officers were murdering people, and that it took more training to be a cosmetologist than to be a police officer. And those were disappointing because, we have a very close relationship with the 49ers. And by we, I mean the police department as a whole. And we have always done everything we could to, have a good relationship and to protect everyone at the stadium, players and spectators alike. So the POA drafted a letter basically about those comments. And then, again, the media hyped it up to say that the police officers were boycotting. And they never said they were going to boycott. And again, then, the chief got involved, and he fed the hype that there was going to be a boycott and that he was going to stop it. And then the mayor got involved and basically said, well, no, the POA is not going to boycott. They just are looking for a little, I don't know what the exact words were, but thanks or recognition. I think it was recognition for, the hard work that the officers do. And again, the POA, thanked the mayor, and we moved on. And, it's kind of a bigger issue now because it's gone across, there's people kneeling during the national anthem, all across the country now. So it's obviously, a bigger issue than just than just Cap's decision. And it's kind of funny because a lot of the media hype is about him doing this, where he actually got to play a football game yesterday, and unfortunately didn't do so well. But that should be what the focus is on the football team and what they're doing. But again, I'm not opposed to the protest. I think what's key is, what it does show is that there's a group of people that are disenfranchised. They don't think the police is there to protect them, and some are in fear of the police departments, and that's a problem.
You think in some places in the country that's a legitimate fear? Maybe not. I mean, I don't think he's ever mentioned Santa Clara police specifically, but do you think that is something that may be a legitimate concern in other places of the country?
Oh, I think it may be. I obviously, I see the news, and I see when there's incidents of potential police brutality and shootings that, when they first come out, appear to be wrong. And that's one of the things I think the police departments really need to do a better job of, is getting the facts out sooner. So in this day and age with the media, if there is a shooting, a lot of times there is, video of it instantaneously up on the internet, on the news feeds and things like that. And generally there are more videos, there's police dashboard cams, there are body cameras, there's surveillance videos. And a lot of times when you see the rest of the videos, you realize that the officers did everything right. Now there's other times when you see everything and you realize the officer did everything wrong. And I think what we need to do as a police department is make sure that we get the information out quickly, if it's good or if it's bad, because that will help to generate trust with the police departments. If people knew that if there was a officer-involved shooting and the officer was wrong, and then that information got out, it would build up trust in the police department. Just like if there was a shooting and initially it looked like it was a bad shooting, but then when more information came out, it was, there's no good shooting, but it was,
Sure.
a legal shooting. I think that information will go a long way to helping, resolve some of these issues.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, since we're on the topic, you touched a little bit on it.
Right. So the Black Lives Matter protest. It's showing that, again, there's a group of individuals or a group of people that believe they are not being represented by the police department, and they've gone so far as to say, that police departments are targeting them, and it has happened. I mean, if you look, I think even just San Francisco recently had a study done, and there was, and I'm sorry, I don't know if it was San Francisco or Oakland, but it was a major agency locally, and they said there was, some inherent bias in the department, and that's something that we need to stop. So it is not just something on the East Coast or something on the South. It's even here on the West Coast, and we need to be aware of it, and we need to respect it. And the worst thing we can do is say you're not true, or you're not telling the truth, or you're wrong, right? Because if someone believes it, then in their mind it is completely true. The old saying, perception is reality. If there are people who don't think that the police department are protecting them, then we as a police department are doing something wrong. And maybe it's not our department, maybe it's a neighboring department or a department in another part of the country, but we're all one and the same. We are all police departments. So we need to make sure that we are listening to them, seeing what their concerns are, and addressing them. Yeah, I think the infamous pepper spray. Yes. And, what I think...
Davis.
This was at Davis.
Mm-hmm.
And
Occupy,
right. I think what the bottom line about this is, this shows how important training is. There was no reason to pepper spray these people that were sitting there. And I think it was a lack of communication and a lack of training. And I don't know all the details, obviously. I don't know what led them to do this, but this is not something that we should be doing as a police department. Now, if they are trespassing and you have given them an order to leave and they have still refused, then yes, you can arrest them. But to just do a mass pepper spray like this, it doesn't solve the problem. It doesn't provide any solution. you should basically go one person at a time and make an arrest. And that's all training, because you need to make sure that your officers know what's appropriate, what's an appropriate use of force, what's not an appropriate use of force, and how to handle every situation. And in this case, obviously, they did not handle it appropriately.
I think we'll do a couple more and then we can move on.
Sure. So, that is
Post-game riot.
Post-game riot.
Okay.
And it's I mean, it's troubling because you have so many people up there. You have a car on fire. You have people taking selfies, and really you don't see any public safety in the area. And maybe they are coming, but obviously they have lost control. And what I see here is it's a lack of planning. This should never happen. When you look at, like the planning, we did for the Super Bowl, this could never have happened in Santa Clara, just because of the number of officers we had, the safety plan that was in place. They did an incredible job, and you couldn't have something like this because of the planning. So, I don't know the details about what this was, but when you have that many people rioting, I'm assuming it was some kind of playoff event, and maybe somebody won, the Vancouver, and obviously they were not properly staffed. They did not have enough resources here to let it get this out of control.
I think we're at 41 minutes. I only have one more picture to show, but I'd hate for it to cut in the middle. Let me just stop and start right for another video here. Because just for people who are watching, the video cuts at about 45 minutes in. So if I come back and I check the camera every so often just to make sure that it's still recording. And I'm going to cut it off preemptively here so we don't get cut off in the middle of Pat answering the next or looking at the next picture. And we're back. Okay, here we go. Last picture.
Okay. It's a great example of what it means to be a boss versus leader, and this is one of the things that I think has led me to run this race, because I really feel that I am a leader, and I have been a leader of the department, and I think that it's a classic example of you lead from the front. You lead by example. You have to tell people what to do, but people should be following what you do because you've set the example. They shouldn't be following you just because you're the boss. And I think a lot of times people get locked into that notion where, I'm the boss, therefore I'm right, and you have to do what I say. And it's regardless of if, they're getting, if it's good or bad, no one is telling them it's a bad thing. So I think as a leader, you need to be out there setting the example. But another thing you need to do is you need to listen. So as this guy who's leading, if the three people behind him say, hey, it would be better to do it, this way, then the leader would listen to them and would adapt and would overcome and would make the changes that were necessary. Where a boss is just going to tell you, this is what I want you to do. And if these three people say, hey, there's a better way to do this, well, the boss is not going to listen to them. The boss is just going to go, no, this is my way to do it, and you need to do it. And I think it's key that as a leader, you set the example, but you also listen to your people.
All right, that's all that's fun icebreaker. Did you have fun with that?
Yeah, that was interesting.
Okay, cool. Was it what you expected or nothing?
Nothing like I would expect.
All right, cool. All right, well, I moved the camera back here. We don't need the monitor any longer. We finished with the first part of the interview. We're going to jump into the second part, and this is the pitch. So,
excellent.
Pat, why should people vote for you? Why should Santa Clarans vote for you?
Okay. Well, like I said, I've been at the Santa Clara Police Department for 25 years, and I've lived here in the city for 24 years. And like I mentioned, I moved into the city because I wanted to be part of the community that I was protecting. So in that 25 years, I've worked every division in many different assignments. I've worked patrol, investigations, services, community services, even the THF, our temporary holding facility. And during that time, I've also was the POA President. So as the POA President, which is the Police Officers Association, I was the POA president for 14 years. As I mentioned, I took a leave of absence to run for the office, so there'd be no conflict of interest. But as the POA president, I gained valuable, what I describe as management level experience. And in that, I mean, I have negotiated multiple contracts. I think I checked and it was 6 contracts. I have attended management team meetings. I have helped draft department policy, including, the body-worn camera policy. I have also participated in disciplinary cases. So I've done a lot of things that maybe a typical sergeant wouldn't have done. So I have a lot more experience than a sergeant who hasn't been the Police Officer Association president. So that's kind of my background of the department. And why I'm running is I'm running to make the department better. And my platform, it's been pretty consistent this whole time. It's been safety first, neighborhoods first, and financial accountability. And you can kind of break those things down. So safety first. We're at the same staffing levels as about 25 years ago. And we have been hiring new officers, but only enough to maintain the status quo. We need to hire a lot more officers. And I think to do that, we need to have a robust recruiting team. We can't have just one person assigned to recruiting. And we need to make sure that we give them the resources they need to go find the best candidates possible. Because the bottom line is if we don't have officers, then every other issue is a moot point. Because we'd end up like San Jose, where they only respond to emergency calls. They are not proactive. So that's a huge issue. And you look at neighborhoods first. There's lots of different aspects to that. And basically, the philosophy is we need to put the residents' needs first ahead of any other special interest or ahead of profits. So a couple of examples. Obviously, with the stadium and the 49ers, that's a big issue. And the North Side residents feel, I think, let down because we haven't been protecting them as well as I think we should have. A couple of examples, the noise ordinance. The 49ers practices this year, I guess the new coach wanted to pump noise in, and obviously that was a concern for the residents. Luckily, the council is taking some action now to monitor the noise and to see if we can, enforce the noise ordinance that already exists. Parking. There's a huge problem with people parking in residential neighborhoods next to the stadium. So that's one of the key things that we could do right now to help neighborhoods is we could establish residential parking zones so that only residents can park in neighborhoods. Overnight, that would eliminate the parking problem. And it's something that it's hard to do, but it's worth trying. And the bottom line is that the residents, the neighbors themselves, they make the decision. If they don't want it, well, then they don't have it. But if they do want it, they take the first steps to make it happen. And that's key. So that's another issue. But it's not just the stadium. There's other areas of the city that need to be protected. One area is the university. University kids have historically had problems with the neighbors who have lived there a long time. University kids will be university kids. So one of my ideas is to have the university fund a full-time police officer. And the police officer would do nothing but university neighborhood relations. And I think that would go a long way to solving the problems. At least you would have someone that could be a liaison between the university, the neighborhoods, and the police departments. And I really think that would help solve a lot of the issues before they come to a point where they have to call the police, for the loud parties. Another issue is traffic. Again, we need to have a robust traffic unit. So that kind of goes back to staffing. If we don't have the staffing, we can't have motor officers out protecting neighborhoods. I know a big concern is increasing traffic. And, I don't know how we can stop traffic from coming. I think it's just part of the life. But what we can do is we can focus the traffic where it should be, on the major thoroughfares and not in residential areas. So I think you should do targeted enforcement with the motors. You should keep them on the residential streets so that people aren't using them as cut-throughs, especially with all the mobile apps that are available. And another key area is in front of schools. The pickup and drop-off times at schools are just, free-for-alls a lot of times. I think we need to have more motor presence at pickup and drop-off time. You know, I was talking to one of the crossing guards, and she said years ago when she called and there was a problem, you know, she would immediately get help. And now she's not getting the help she needs. And again, I think it's part of the problem is we just don't have the motor unit staffed as well as it should be, which goes, again, to the staffing issue. And then the final platform that I've been running on is financial accountability. And the big one is Measure J. And it's using general fund money to fund stadium operations. And there's an audit going on right now, and they are doing update meetings. And I know Hosam has been there at those meetings, so I'm sure they've been live streamed. But the bottom line is, at the last meeting, they confirmed that the police department was spending general fund money at the stadium. And that has to stop. We need to stop that immediately, because the bottom line is the general fund money is your tax dollars. And your tax dollars should be going to Santa Clara. It should be for not just police, but also fire and parks and street maintenance. All those things we should be paying for, not to protect the stadium. Another aspect about the money is the amount of money that the 49ers pay for public safety. You know, when we initially opened up the stadium, the budget was woefully lacking. And as a result, you know, we've been taking money that potentially would come back to the general fund as profits just to fund public safety costs. You know, when it first started, I think we got about $170,000 per NFL game, and I think the average we spend is around $220,000. So that extra money, which potentially would have come back to the city, is not, because it's being used to cover costs up there that I think the 49ers should be covering. So that's something else that I'm advocating for, is that the 49ers should pay more for public safety. So that's kind of the three main platforms that I've been running on. I've been pretty consistent, you know, the whole time. There's other nuances, and, you know, maybe we'll answer some other questions. But that's really what I'm campaigning on. And the bottom line is, I think we need to make a change. I think we are not headed in the right direction. And I think those priorities that I just outlined are what the priorities of the department should be. You know, people ask me all the time, they say, you know, why is the chief an elected position? And I say, well, it's because the voters of Santa Clara want it that way. You know, they've put it on the ballot before, and the voters resoundingly turn it down. They want to elect their police chief. And I think it's great, because the police chief answers to no one but the public. The chief doesn't answer to the mayor, doesn't answer to the city manager. The police chief answers to the voters directly. So if there is a safety concern, they should be handling it. So that's kind of where I'm standing. That's what my platform is, and I'm happy to answer some questions here.
Yeah, let's do it. So we finished the second part of the interview. We're going to jump into the third part, which is the hot seat. And we're going to start to crank up. We'll crank it up slowly and slowly. And actually, the first question is actually something you just touched on right now. So I'd like to see if you have any more things that you'd like to elaborate on.
Sure.
Which is, you know, that Santa Clara is the only city in California that elects its chief of police. Certainly, there are pros and cons.
Right.
So talk to me about pros and cons, and you've already, you know, said that you believe in that. But
right.
Talk to me about pros and cons and walk me through it.
Sure. Well, you know, I'll give you the, you know, and again, I'll try to be open and honest with you. There are cons to have an elected chief. The con is that the chief has to live in Santa Clara. So you do limit your pool somewhat. You only have whoever is living in the city that is eligible to run for sheriff. So there's a con there in that there could be potentially other candidates who are good candidates, but they don't live in the city. So, you know, like, you know, when you say...
And are not willing to relocate.
Not willing to relocate. Yeah. And, you know, you look at, you know, when you hear somebody's doing a nationwide search for the best candidate. So in Santa Clara, you couldn't do that. You couldn't have a nationwide search. So that, I think, is probably the biggest con to the elected chief system. Isn't that a good thing that
the chief then gets to know the city that they're policing? I mean, they're invested in it, and they're not. It's not just a job that pays the bills, but it's something that they're protecting their neighbors, their brothers and sisters that are, you know. I mean,
exactly. No, like I said, that's the one con I could see that people would argue. But I think the pros far outweigh that, and I think you hit one, you know, right on the head. the chief living in the city, so the chief knows what's going on in their city, not just from work, but from living there. You know, I mean, I go to the grocery store here in town. I go out to dinner here in town. You know, I know that there's, you know, some places that are great to eat dinner, but I also know that there's, you know, really no nightlife here in Santa Clara. I have to go somewhere else to do that. I know when I go to the grocery store, I can see, you know, the problems if there's, you know, people panhandling in front of the store or on the streets. So I know the issues intimately. I get to know people, not just at a work level, but on a personal level. You know, when you know, I've coached PAL before, so I've met a bunch of parents. You know, I've been involved in the PTA before, so you meet all the school parents. You know, I help with grad night, so you again meet some kids that are graduating high school and moving on. You know, be involved in all the high school programs. You get to know your community just intimately. And so I think that the pros of an elected chief far outweigh the con.
Is that something you think more cities should adopt?
Yeah, and I don't know why people have gone away from that. You know, when I started, there were several cities that kind of had the elected chief, and I think, like you said, we're the last one. And, you know,
do you think it's unique per city, or do you think that it's something that could be applicable anywhere?
I think it could be applicable anywhere. I mean, I think, you know, maybe on a, you know, again, on a huge city like, say, San Jose, Oakland, or San Francisco, well, why wouldn't you want your chief to live in the city? I mean, I think that is great. I mean, you want a chief who is part of the community. And so I think it could apply to every city. And I kind of describe it as it's like a mini sheriff's race. You know, every sheriff is elected in California, and nobody questions that. But, you know, people question the police chief. Well, I think it's the exact same thing, but on a more intimate scale. So I just see the benefits to it.
Mm. Well, talking about this, I mean, and you did again touch on this a little bit earlier in terms of being elected is that you answer to the people, right? In other cities where they're not elected, you know, they either answer to the city manager, or to the council, or to the mayor. Right. So tell me about a Chief Nikolai. Who does he answer to? I mean, people suggest that you won't be an independent voice, that you won't be a, you know, that you know, and that obviously flies in the face of the whole point of an elected chief.
Exactly.
So who does a Chief Nikolai answer to?
The Chief Nikolai answers to the voters. If I am elected, it is because the voters like my platform, they like what I'm saying, and that is what I will keep doing. And why I keep going, I will have an open door policy. And I joke because some people say, well, the chief has an open door policy, but he's never there. Well, I'll make sure that I am there so I can, you know, talk to people if they have concerns and questions. Because, you know, and it's not just during work hours. Again, I live here. I shop here. I walk to Sarah's Kitchen for breakfast. So it's great that I'd be visible so that if someone at the grocery store says, hey, chief, I have a problem in my neighborhood with this car that's parked, well, then I can address it, you know, and make sure that it's taken care of. You know, I think that's one of the things that's, you know, that I've heard from other people is that I'm accessible and approachable, where people come up to me and they're like, you know, well, you're not really a cop, you're too nice. And I take that as a compliment, you know, that, hey, I'm approachable. I can, you know, answer the tough questions. And I think that's the key. You know, I've heard the negative is that I am a union guy. So the police association will be running the department. And there's nothing that's further from the truth. I think what people don't realize is the police association represents the officers, sergeants, and lieutenants. There's only 5 sworn people that aren't represented by the association, and that's, you know, the chief and the captain. And for the entire part of their career, they were POA members. So they were all part of the association. And we worked together closely with the department. So the police association wouldn't run the department. The chief runs the department. But I think it's important to have a good working relationship with the association so that you don't have any issues. So that if something comes up that, you know, is controversial, like body cameras, you know, if there was a bad relationship, then there would be fighting and feuding over that. Where, you know, as the leader of the POA, I was able to work with the department to get that up and running, because we as, you know, POA members see body cameras as a great tool. We don't see it as any kind of hindrance or anything like that. So I think you have to have a good relationship with your POA, and I think we do. So, it would be like saying that the current chief, the POA runs the current department, and we don't. We work with the chief's office.
But you mentioned a comment, which I believe people's perception is their reality.
Uh-huh.
And how would you address people's perception that you're not an independent guy, that you either answer to the POA or that you answer to the mayor or to the members of the council? How do you address that?
Well, I think I guess the proof is in the pudding, as the saying goes. And when you look at my history as a leader at the department, I have always done not what's best for me, for myself, but what's best for the group that I am representing. So yeah, as a POA president, I would work to improve POA members. But at the same time, you can't do that to the detriment of the rest of the department. Because what I realize is we're not in a vacuum. So if as a POA we got a 100% raise, well, that would cripple the budget, and there'd be no money for dispatchers, CSOs, for cars, for anything. So it's not realistic. So you have to realize that it's a symbiotic relationship with everybody in the department. So I think one of the things that I have been able to show is that I do work well with everyone, with the non-sworn, with the chief's office. And I work well with the, elected officials. I'm not the chief, but I have the support of a lot of elected officials because I've been able to interact with them, over my years of service here. So, to say that I would be answering to those people is false because, like I've said, the chief answers to the voters, and that's the bottom line.
Let's switch gears and talk a little bit about qualifications. I mean, a lot of talk has been going on about, obviously, the fact that you don't have a 4-year degree,
right?
And the fact that the way the policy is right now in the police department is that for you to go to lieutenant and higher positions, that you do need that 4-year degree. But clearly, we also know that the chief of police position doesn't require that 4-year degree. The requirement is that you live in the city, that you're a registered voter in the city, and that you meet the requirements for office of sheriff, which it does list a 4-year degree, but it also lists options for years of service in lieu of that degree, right?
Right.
So, which clearly you meet with 25 years of service. So,
right.
But when you look at other cities do require a degree, and sometimes, I mean, this says candidates, some cities have this as a requirement. Candidates should possess a bachelor's degree in administration of justice, criminology, public administration, or a related field. So, clearly there's the sentiment that, if you were not in Santa Clara, right, where the chief of police is not elected, and you had been in any other city, and that was a desire for you to run for chief of police of that city, that you would just simply not qualify in any other city. No recruiting agency for any other city would even consider you because they would look at just at that qualification and they wouldn't see it. Right. So, I mean, what's going on here? I mean,
right. No,
is there something broken with our Santa Clara system, or why didn't you get a degree? I mean, there's a whole lot of questions that are revolved around this issue.
Right. So, like I said, I went down to Cal Poly, and I was there for 3 years. I probably would not have gotten a degree in 4 years. It probably would have taken me 5. It's a pretty tough school. But I ended up leaving early, and we started a family early. And I just never went back to school. And what I did is I got a profession where I had the qualifications, and that was to be a police officer for the city of Santa Clara. And that's where I want to be, is in the city of Santa Clara. So I've seen the chart that says, I'm not qualified to be I'm not qualified to be the chief in Gilroy or Mountain View or Sunnyvale, I think, all the other little agencies around here. Well, I don't want to be a chief there. I want to be the chief here in Santa Clara. And the bottom line, like you said, is I am qualified. So when I look back at, my career, I have taken the, necessary classes and all of the training for each position that I've held in the department. So I've had a lot of training. The only thing I never did was I never went and signed up for an online degree program. And, you know...
Why not?
I mean... I just never felt that, you know... frankly, it's almost a joke at our department. And people...
Okay, I haven't heard that, so tell me more.
So basically, the feeling... So when I started, there was no degree requirement to become a lieutenant.
Okay.
When I started, it was just basically
how
like
long
to be
ago
chief.
you roughly?
So probably, you know,
just rough.
15 years ago.
Okay, so it's been some time though.
Yeah. So it changed. But again, I have always argued that it is wrong to have this requirement, and it wasn't for me. I wasn't arguing just for me. I was arguing for the membership, and I was arguing for the department, because I think if you limit your pool, you are hurting yourself. And by that, what I mean is, so if you make an arbitrary rule that says you now have to have a 4-year degree to become a lieutenant, you are eliminating half of the sergeants in the department just by saying that you need to have this piece of paper. So unfortunately, what people had to do is they had to sign up for online, you know, college and spend $20,000, $30,000 in order to complete some training online to get a piece of paper that now says they have a degree.
But are you saying then that what they learn in that college is useless?
Not necessarily. I think it depends on each individual. You know, when I say it's a joke, it's because, you know, there are some people that have taken the classes and then they give all the information to the next person so that that person can do it. And I think that happens, you know, not just in the department.
I mean, is that a bad thing? I mean, that's...
No, it's not necessarily.
Okay.
I just don't see that necessarily that gives you any benefit towards... Not any benefit, that's the wrong term. What I mean is it doesn't give you any more qualifications to become chief of police.
So are you saying then that there aren't any... so there's obviously there's book learning and there's on the job learning, right? Or practical learning. And I don't think anybody disputes the the need for practical application.
Right.
So the question that people are bringing up is that, are you suggesting then that the book learning, at least the ones that you get in a 4-year degree, because there's obviously training as an officer anyways.
Right.
You have to do so many hours of training, and I know
Right.
Santa Clara does above and beyond the minimum requirement. But are you saying that the book learning that is offered at these 4-year degree institutions are not relevant to the job, or that they're... I keep saying the word useless, but I mean it's certainly not useless. But it's that they're not worth the time, they're not worth the money. I mean, what's really the sentiment there?
I think what you really need to look at is what you're learning during that program. You know, for example, you know, to be a lieutenant, you know, let's say 25 years ago, I finished my 4-year degree. So my degree was in mechanical engineering. So I would have had a degree in mechanical engineering.
But that wouldn't have qualified for some of those other departments that ask for a degree in justice criminology.
Right,
or
but it would have given me a degree to promote in the department. So I could have been a
so that's just for Santa Clara.
For Santa Clara.
So Santa Clara doesn't differentiate behind which 4-year degree you have.
No.
Well then,
I don't believe so. No. So I would have had the degree requirements, and I would argue, does you know, a mechanical engineering degree help make a person a better lieutenant? And I don't think so. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the rule is different. Maybe it has to be.
Do you think then that it would be better suited that the city change that policy, or the police department change that policy to a 4-year degree related to criminal justice or criminology or...
Right. No, I think the department would be better served by eliminating that rule. I think you should look at the candidate as they are now. Again, if you
Let me ask you a different question. Sorry.
Yeah.
I don't mean to cut you off. If you want to keep going.
No, go ahead.
But, if you had a degree, would you still hold the same viewpoint?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, definitely. I loved the position of sergeant, and I really liked everything I could do as a sergeant. And, you know, frankly, under the current administration, I don't think I would enjoy being a lieutenant. So I don't know that I would promote past my current position, even if I had a degree. But going back to my argument, and I've made this argument, you know, repeatedly,
Sure.
is you are limiting your pool by putting a rule on there about having a degree. Now, I think you should have a combination of education and experience. And I've said, you know, let's say you have a
What
sergeant.
kind of education would meet what you're looking for?
Well, to be a Santa Clara officer, you have to have basically a 2-year degree. You have to have the equivalent of an AA degree.
Okay.
So you have that education. And then you have post-certifications. So as you grow in the department and get more training, police officer standard training. Right. Yeah. And so you have, intermediate, basic post, you get intermediate, you get advanced, you get supervisory post. So I think if you limit your pool by saying you have to have a 4-year degree, you are eliminating a lot of potentially qualified people that don't have a degree, that maybe like me, left school early. So if you arbitrarily say you have to have a degree, and so you have a 3-year sergeant who's only worked patrol that has a degree, they are qualified to be a lieutenant. But a sergeant who has, let's say, 20 years experience and has worked in 3 different divisions, they are not qualified.
So where do you draw the line? Because you're saying that it would be okay to have an associate's degree, 2-year degree.
Right.
I mean, at some point, these rules, while they may seem arbitrary, they do help to create some sort of boundary or guideline around. Right. You also don't want to open the pool completely, right? Because it makes the recruiting job a lot harder, and B, maybe some of the decisions then become more arbitrary than others, right?
Right.
I like this person just because I like them, and then you may have another person who has a certain number of hours of post training or additional training, and maybe they're not as likable as a person. So I mean, you have to draw the line somewhere. So
exactly.
Why are you feeling that the AA degree is maybe the line that should be drawn, and somebody else could disagree and say, no, I think a 4-year degree should be the line.
Right. Well, I'm not saying that is the way to go, but what I'm saying is we should look at it. And I think limiting our department, because we're not a big department.
Right.
We have 20, 25 sergeants. So if you are looking for the best qualified person to be a lieutenant, why would you limit your pool with this one requirement? So I think you would need to look at, okay, what would be appropriate? And I think that's something that I would definitely research. I would definitely look to change this, and I would research what is the appropriate balance. Because you're right, you don't want to open up to anybody, because then you've eliminated any desire to move forward. But I think you set a time limit, if you've worked as a sergeant for 10 years, if you've worked 2 divisions, maybe.
And your performance rating is at a certain level or whatever.
Exactly.
Over a consistent period of time or something.
And at the same time, you don't eliminate someone because they have a degree and a limited service. Maybe there's a balance. And again, I think what you want to do is you want to get the best qualified person. You want the best lieutenants possible because, again, they're going to be becoming your captains. And you want the best captains possible. And again, you're going to want to encourage growth in your department. Not just say, hey, I don't care what your performance is. If you have a degree, you're going to qualify to be a lieutenant. Sure. I think that's wrong.
Okay. Now, you've been, I think, a sergeant since 2001, about 15 years or so, maybe 14, depending on when.
Right.
And you just mentioned that under the current administration, you don't have a desire to be a lieutenant, even if you did qualify. Is that a feeling that you've had for a long time, or is that something that maybe it comes and goes or changes as the administration changes?
As the administration changes, it's a good question. And really, when I became a sergeant, I wanted to become a good sergeant, and it takes time in each rank, to gain experience and gain knowledge. So, again, I think that if you are a sergeant for 3 years and you decide that you want to be a lieutenant, I'm not necessarily sure that's the best thing. Have you really done enough as a sergeant, different assignments, different problems? Have you experienced enough to make yourself a good lieutenant candidate? I don't know. So initially, again, I had no desire to promote, and initially I think I was qualified to promote, but I wanted to become a sergeant that was well-rounded, that would be a good candidate if I ever chose down the line to become a sergeant. So again, I worked,
a lieutenant.
Right, to be lieutenant. So, I mean, I've worked, I worked community services, I worked patrol, I worked investigations, I worked in
and at
services.
no point in that time you felt that, maybe I do want to be a lieutenant, and so therefore I should probably do that degree, get that degree.
No, I honestly, and again, that goes back to my argument that I had, is that this degree requirement, it hurt.
You just don't
believe it.
Yeah, you just don't believe in it.
I just don't believe in it.
Let's see. Well, let me just ask you a question, and I think I know the answer based on your responses here. But I'm going to ask it bluntly. It's the hot seat.
Yeah.
So if you become chief, are you going to complete a 4-year degree?
If I have the time, I don't see why I wouldn't complete a 4-year degree. And I think it could help to have specifically a police management class, and that could be beneficial to me. There's other programs that the chief has access to, such as the FBI National Academy. I don't have access to that now, right. So that would be something I would look at as well. And again, what I think I would do is talk to my captains, talk to my lieutenants, and see, what was beneficial to them. Did they think, a certain class was beneficial? Did they think a certain program was good? What do they think I would benefit from? Because I realize I'm not, I don't know everything. I know I'm not, the smartest guy in the room. But I know that other people all have things they can bring to the table, and I would actively mine them is a good way to do it, and get as much information from them as possible for ways that I could improve myself as a leader.
Now, I mean, one of the things, because you mentioned about, like you said, surrounding yourself with the captains and lieutenants and getting their advice and their input and that sort of a thing. I mean, wouldn't you say that there is obviously on-the-job training that you get as you get promoted through the ranks up until assistant chief, before becoming chief? I mean, do you feel like if you were to be elected as chief, that you would have kind of that on-the-job training that you missed out on for not being a lieutenant, for not being a captain or a assistant chief?
Right. No, that's a good question. And again, I kind of alluded to it a little bit. I think my experience as a POA president has given me a lot more experience than a typical sergeant would have. Sure. I would say that I have had lieutenant experience for 14 years. And to a degree, captain experience. Like I said, the majority of the police department is a POA member. So I've, in effect, led the entire department, except for the chiefs and the captains. So I have that experience. At the same time, maybe the, like day-to-day budgeting or the day-to-day workings of a captain, maybe I don't know that. And I can't say that I've never worked as a captain.
Sure. But I think that's the question that people ask, right? Is that,
but again, the bottom line is I realize my limitations, and I know when I need to learn something, and I know that we have great people at the department. We have great, leaders at all different ranks, and I know that, because they all support me, I know that they would be giving me assistance, and they would help me make the transition.
Now, you were POA president for 14 years, so you've been a sergeant for about 15. So you were a POA president pretty early on in your sergeant career.
Right.
So tell me, how does that happen? I mean, typically, a POA president or somebody in that kind of a leadership position, well, certainly you've been around for 25 years, so people know who you are. But I mean, wouldn't typically a POA organization hire, put or elect as their president or choose as their president somebody who has a little more time as a sergeant or a lieutenant or a captain? Or,
right. Well, it's good.
Or maybe not captain since it doesn't cover.
And because I didn't come in right as the POA president. Okay. I was a POA board member to start with.
I see.
And
okay.
so it's a good question because I never really talked about it. But I was on the POA board, and then I moved up, and I think I was the vice president. I might have even been the secretary for a while as well. So I held some roles as the POA before I became president.
Got it. Okay.
So I think, don't quote me on this, but I think I actually...
Well, you're on video, so everything's being quoted right now.
I think I was the POA president as an officer, and then I promoted to sergeant while I was the POA president.
Oh.
But I'm not 100% sure. I could have been just another, just on the board as an officer.
It was like, 14, 15 years ago?
Yeah, exactly. Kind of blurs together. But, so the bottom line is I had POA experience, and that's why I ran for president. I didn't just come in cold turkey to be the POA president.
Okay. Now, you did mention that while you were involved in the POA, that you helped draft policy. You briefly talked about the body-worn cameras. Can you tell me, can you maybe elaborate on that example or give me other examples where you've helped draft policy? Because I think that's a very important experience that a chief will have because they work closely with the council, with the mayor, and obviously they're the head of their department, and they manage policy within their department. So
Right.
give some examples.
So there were issues. When you have policy changes that affect POA members, then you have to, it's called meet and confer. You have to work with the association in order to make sure that the changes are fair.
And does the POA always have to give a stamp of approval before a policy goes into effect, or not necessarily?
Not necessarily. You have to meet and confer, but you don't have to meet and agree.
Okay.
You learned that early.
Okay. Now, has there been any scenarios where maybe there was disagreement and you guys weren't able to come to a... Maybe if it's not something that you can go into detail about, that's okay, but just... Yeah. I mean, how did you handle those sort of situations?
We had an issue with... It was during Chief Lodge when he was a chief, and he was making some proposed changes to scheduling, like specifically with field training officers, and these changes were pretty pronounced changes that would affect officers' seniority. Mm-hmm. Our patrol bid is all by seniority, mm-hmm. and so he was proposing making changes that would disrupt that, would change that. Sure. So we fought that pretty heavily. And in the end, he was going to go forward with the proposed changes anyway. So we actually, went and had legal, talked to our attorney, mm-hmm. who drafted a letter just saying, hey, we don't think you should do this. And he ended up changing his mind. We didn't do any kind of legal action. We just, said, hey, we don't think you should do this. And he ended up changing his mind. And he worked with us to make the changes. So, that was probably one of the last times. Isn't that a little bit of
strong-arming? I mean, is that... I don't know the details behind it, so I don't know.
Right.
And I certainly don't know the details of how the seniority level works.
Right.
So maybe it's an unfair question, but isn't that a little bit strong-arming? I mean, you can't come to an agreement, so you get an attorney to influence.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't strong-arming. It was just basically saying, hey, we don't think this is appropriate, and we think there could be legal, repercussions. Mm. And again, the chief obviously agreed with us because he didn't go forward with the proposal. If he had gone forward anyway, would we have still pressed or not? I don't know. But again, that's kind of like where, as the association president, mm-hmm. you have to lead for the majority of your group. Mm-hmm. So the membership wanted to fight this battle, and we fought this battle.
Without talking about Chief Lodge, I mean, mm-hmm. specifically, or using that example, what would I mean? How would a department come up, end up being in that state where the chief or management in general, again, it's not as specific about this example,
right,
is just not in touch with rank and file about the issues, to know about those issues and how it would disrupt their seniority levels before coming with this proposal. I mean, certainly, again, I mean, I know Chief Lodge. I mean, mm-hmm. I don't ever think that he would do something unreasonable.
Right.
I mean, there certainly were benefits to his proposal. Again, not knowing any details, but I mean, I know him. He's not somebody who's unreasonable who would propose something that... And obviously, in your opinion, or in the Police Officers Association opinion, the cons outweigh the benefits, and that's why you guys are influencing to change it. But I mean, tell me about how does a chief keep in touch with the rank and file so that they are not making proposals that would end up in, even as far as legal action?
Right. Well, I think you need to have open lines of communication, and you need to have a good relationship with the association leadership. One of the things I think you can do, and it's a very simple thing, is the chief could go to briefings. You have a briefing, everybody briefs every day. You can meet with entire teams, spend 15 minutes, and you could spend just 10, 15 minutes talking to your officers on the street. Mm-hmm. And that's going to get you a lot of feedback. And not necessarily on any big issues, but on little issues. Something like, hey, the back door is broken again. You know what I mean? It's just, it's always broken, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's something that if you came to briefings, you would know.
That doesn't go to the chief. That goes to like a facilities manager or something.
Right. Exactly. But
it's a bad example. But
right. But what I mean is, little things, like, hey, the TV is out, or any little thing. The officers, the chief would know that they could then designate.
They're frustrated. They're upset.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then that once you have that open line of communication about those little things, then you could have the open line of communication about bigger problems. So, these little things, you're right, they're not the chief's problem, but, when officers go to
feel like
the chief,
they're being listened to.
Exactly. And when something gets fixed that they brought to the chief, then they know, okay, the chief is listening to me. I do matter. It's not just, I'm not just a number. I'm not just a guy on the street, right? So then when there are bigger issues, then maybe those officers would then go to the chief and say, hey, chief, this FTO problem, we don't like this. Oh, why not? And again, it's the good communication, because there are going to be times when the chief and the POA do not agree on something. And that's going to happen. You try to work through the problems. But again, like you said, the chief at the time had his reasons, and he thought it was good for the department. There's going to be those times. And that's what I tell, when I talk to POA, people all the time. I said, you realize that moving forward, when I am chief, there's going to be times when we, butt heads, when we don't agree on policies. And they understand that. But I think the bottom line is they realize I would be acting in the department's best interest, and I would be available to listen to them, to help them, make changes if they're appropriate.
I'm going to dive into that a little bit more. Let me just stop and record here a little bit. Just give me 1 second. And we're back, I think. Yes, we are back. Okay, so just, continuing along that same line of discussion.
Yeah.
One of the things that people ask and worry about is that because you have such a strong relationship, which, again, like you're saying, it has its clear benefits.
Right.
With the POA, that our police department is going to be run by the POA, or that, you mentioned that, you said you guys realize that if I get elected, we're going to butt heads.
Right.
But I think people aren't... that's not the sentiment that people have, or that people talk about, right? I mean, certainly there is benefit to some healthy tension in the system, right? And obviously, negative or vitriolic tension is bad,
right?
But there is some benefit to healthy tension in that it ensures that all parties find a win-win,
right?
Or win-win-win-win, depending on how many parties there
are. Exactly.
So, I mean, people question that because you have been so involved in the POA, and for good reason, but that you may not be an objective chief of police when it comes to issues that are in conflict with the POA. Tell me about that.
No, that's a good point.
This is the hot seat.
Yeah,
I'm cranking up the heat a little bit.
I like it. I like it. For example, we've been talking about degree requirement, right?
Sure.
Whether or not you should have a degree requirement for being a lieutenant.
Sure.
I don't agree with that, obviously. So, let me say I take that back to my, command staff after I'm elected. And all of my command staff says, no, you need to have a degree for
because of X,
these
Y, Z,
reasons,
yeah.
right? Well, I need to listen to them. And I need to, not be, the dictator, for lack of a better term, and say no.
Or the boss.
Yeah, the boss. No, this is what I want. We're going to make this change. And I think that's what the POA sees in me, is that I would be open, but at the same time, I wouldn't let them run the department. I would be open to working with them to say, like, hey, here's what I want to do. I want to eliminate the degree requirement. And let's say the POA says, no, we like the degree requirement, right? Well, let's see if we can find a common solution, And if my entire command staff doesn't like it, and, the POA is split, well, then I'm going to go ahead with that change, even if the POA was opposed to it. But I would let them be part of the decision-making process. And the other thing I think that's key is you need to explain the reason you're making a decision. And I think that goes a long way to taking that, animosity away. So if I'm making a decision that may be perceived as against the POA, if you explain to them the reasons why, hey, I am doing this because, there's a court mandate that says I have to do this. Well, that will go a long way to resolving an issue. And if I said, hey, I am going to do this program because of A, B, and C, and the POA comes to me and says, well, no, actually it's C, D, and E. Okay, I will listen. Because you have to be able to listen to make changes that work for everybody. But the bottom line is, as the chief, you are the decision making. As at some point, you are the boss. The buck stops with you. If there is a problem at the department, it is on you. If general fund money. If you are spending general fund money, that comes back to the chief's office. It's not, the CSO who's writing parking tickets. The buck stops with you. So you are the one who is responsible for the decision making.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that, because I had a question that was later on, but I'm going to pull it up here in this because it's in the same line of, or the same thought process here, in terms of how the POA is a party at the table when it comes to issues of the department, and communication, open line of communication
Right.
with the chief.
Right.
And then you see, as we talked about here with the pictures, and again, this is to caveat that you weren't POA president at the time.
Right.
And there's no need for you to throw anybody under the bus in this, whether it's non-POA management or POA management, right? But what happened with the letter with the Kaepernick protest,
Right.
Clearly as an outsider, and I'm not even that much of an outsider because I live in Santa Clara.
Exactly.
Right? I mean,
Right.
there's outsiders across the country who even perceived that it was the police department making that statement, and which it was not true, and
Right.
they didn't understand the nuances behind the fact that officers who work at the stadium or for stadium-related events are doing it as part of overtime or free
Right.
time, right?
Right.
So it's not necessarily a boycott, which a lot of people nationwide thought, and even people within Santa Clara who didn't understand the nuances
Right.
thought as well.
Right.
But when you see a letter like that, it indicates a disconnect in communication between the POA and the police department, and if these lines of communication, as you mentioned, were open, that maybe it could have just taken a phone call rather than a public letter.
Mm-hmm.
Let me ask some hypotheticals. If you were POA president and you weren't running for chief,
Right.
how would have you handled it differently, or a different way of looking at it? If you were chief when that Kaepernick protest happened, how would have things turned
Been
out?
different?
Yeah.
Well,
Fair question.
yeah.
I mean,
I understand what you're saying. I'm trying to
get at here.
Yeah. So, I agree with the general content of the POA's letter, in that, again, part of the problem I think was the media focused on a few sentences and hyped it up to where the POA was going to boycott the event. And that was never in the letter.
No, but okay. Sorry, I'm not interrupting you for time here. I'm just because the conversation,
Right,
right?
right.
I mean, even as a Santa Clara resident who understood the nuances,
Right.
when I read it, I can see that for some people who don't understand the way the arrangement is set up right now, could
Right.
read the letter as a threat of boycott.
Okay. And again,
I mean, it's not, and I'm not saying that
Right.
that was intended or not. But if I can see, even as someone who understands the nuances, how somebody a layperson
Right.
would read that as a threat of boycott.
and that's a good point. And we said this earlier, perception is reality.
Right.
So, you asked what I would do differently, is then I would work to make sure that the letter clarified, or made it clearer that they weren't going to boycott. They were just disappointed in his comments. And really they were looking for the 49ers to make a statement, supporting the officers. Basically say, hey, we have good trained officers that have worked with us for years. So that's something I would have done differently, I guess, as the POA, to make sure the message was clearer.
But do you still believe that an open letter like that was appropriate, rather than just talking to the police department direct? I mean, not just the police department. You guys are all members of the police department.
Right,
I mean,
right.
like to the management, to the chief.
Right. Well, the letter was not directed to the police department. It was directed to the 49ers.
I see. Okay.
So,
okay.
yeah, I mean, it had to go to
Fair.
the 49ers.
Understood.
Now, what I would have done differently as the chief is, when the chief came out, he kind of fostered the perception that there was a boycott.
Without talking about
the
current
right.
chief, right?
So,
how would you have handled
I
it?
would have handled it differently is I would have supported the members to make sure that it was clear, hey, they are not saying they are going to boycott. Clarify. It's a voluntary assignment, and I anticipate that the officers will be working it because they are good, well-trained officers, and that's what they do. And I would hope that what I would have done is supported the members and said, these comments specifically, again, the POA supported his right to protest. That was in the letter very clearly.
Yes, it was. Yes.
And I think that, the chief should have supported that as well and said, yes, we support his right to protest, and just commented on those specific
Again, talk about
comments.
what you would have done.
So what I would have done is commented on those specific comments and say, those comments, are not representative of my men,
Stance.
my
your
men and women of my Santa Clara Police Department. and we are well trained. We have worked closely with the 49ers for years to provide a safe environment for everyone. That's how I would have handled it as a chief.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We are going to change gears completely here. Okay. So at the MCA forum, so the MCA and Care forum, which I live streamed, there was a good forum there, and you brought up, which I think was the only time that had ever been brought up in this campaign, about the DARE program.
Yes.
And you had suggested that the DARE program be expanded at the MCA forum.
Right.
Now there are some thoughts in the community as to the effectiveness of the DARE program.
Right.
There are some thoughts that maybe it should be adjusted, or even as far as suspended, or even eliminated.
Right.
So what is your stance on the DARE program? Because I think there's also some sentiment in the community that maybe beyond what, aside from what you had said at the MCA, that you were critical of the DARE program.
Right. I mean, I was the DARE supervisor for 3 years, so I mean, I saw it intimately. And what I think the key about the DARE program is that you have an officer on campus talking to kids in a positive, light. The kids aren't in trouble. They see officers as teachers, as role models. So that, I think, is the most valuable part of the DARE program. Does the DARE program work? I mean, again, you can read studies that say it does work. You can read studies that says it doesn't work. I don't know if it works or not. But what I do know is that the positive interactions that the officers have with the students, it's trite, but it's priceless. Because you get that one-to-one almost contact with an officer where you're not in trouble. You didn't do anything wrong. You can ask the officer anything. I know they have like a DARE box questions where you can ask the officer anything. And those relationships last. I mean, I remember working with a DARE officer, and he would see kids in high school who remembered him as the 5th grade DARE, officer. So what we need to do is we need to make sure there are more opportunities for
Is that something
officers.
you would expand?
Yes. And, unfortunately, we actually took one of our school resource officers away recently. And that, I think, is wrong. I think we should increase our school resource presence. You need to have officers on campuses, not just as a role model, but also in the event that something horrible happened on campus, that the officers are there and ready to act if needed. Now, does the DARE program, again, you said, does the DARE program work? I don't know. But I do know that the officers on campus is a wonderful program. And if there was like say a new program came out that was more effective than DARE, well, maybe we would switch to a different program.
So it's not about the DARE program
in
and of itself. It's about the interaction, the putting a face to the profession or to the name, or
exactly. That's what's important.
Okay, let's talk about profiling. You saw the picture of the presidential election. We're very heated election cycle, not just locally, which we know it's very heated, but even just nationally. And there's a lot of sentiment, there's a lot of tension, there's a lot of pent up anger in the country as a whole, actually. And you get comments like deport all the Mexicans, ban all the Muslims from the U.S., stuff like this. And this is on top of all the incidences we've seen. We talked about in the other pictures with the Black Lives Matter protests and the excessive use of police force or police brutality, again in some cases where it wasn't justified at all towards African Americans. So I mean, a lot of issues nationwide that we're seeing here, and a lot of sentiment, not just even actions, but even more than the actions, exponentially more than the actions, just that pent up anger that people have. And particularly because here in Santa Clara we have a very diverse community, a very diverse community. So tell me how, as chief of police, you would address this or handle this.
Well, I think an easy way to do it is to make sure that we have a diverse department. And again, it goes back to we need to have a good recruiting team that we can send to all different places to recruit. I mean, when I was at the MCA, I was like, why don't we recruit up here? I mean, it's a great venue. I'm sure there are individuals that attend there on a regular basis that maybe are interested in being a law enforcement officer.
MCA, for people who are watching who might not know, is the Muslim Community Association. It's the mosque that we have here, and community center that we have here in Santa Clara, one of the largest in the country, largest in the West Coast.
Exactly.
There was a forum probably a couple weeks now, or
right,
where it was a candidate forum. Just
to clarify, exactly. So we should be reaching out to the different communities, to make sure that our department represents them. And again, that would go a long way to helping, people feel like the police department represents them, not just, is against them. Mm. And another important thing is communication. When people asked me, one of the questions was, what's the department doing right? And it's the communication. We are getting a lot of communication out, and I think we need to keep doing that and look for new ways to get the communication out there. We should have a good relationship with our community groups so that if an issue pops up, we can address it right away. And again, if a lot of times, things will pop up and they're just, false. They're completely untrue. And as soon as you get the correct information out, it takes care of all the problem instead of letting something fester and blow up.
How diverse would you say the Santa Clara Police Department is right now in terms of not just, there's, gender, there's obviously, orientation, there's ethnicities or religions. How diverse would you say Santa Clara Police Department is, or is there room for improvement? Or
I think there's room for improvement. I mean, we have a diverse, department, but I think you can always, be better. You can always include more groups. And, we've had, I'm trying to think like a, Korean officer. And why don't we have a very strong Korean population, and a lot of times there's calls and having
and
a Korean
and Latino and
right.
I mean, it's,
so just for an example,
yeah.
And so having a Korean speaking officer would be invaluable, especially when like some of the Asian cultures, again they are fearful of the police just from their culture back home. So we need to make sure that they don't feel that way here, because we are not a discriminatory police department. We don't profile. We arrest the bad guys. If you are a bad guy, you are going to be arrested, regardless of what color you are. And that's what I think is great about our department, is we are proactive. We go and we find the bad people wherever they are.
So let's talk about neighborhoods, and I know you talked about this on one of your platforms. You talked obviously about the issues of the north side with regards to noise and traffic and parking.
Right.
Because of whether it's events at the stadium or otherwise, and then obviously there's City Place, which is going to be a huge development that's happening up there.
Right.
And that's, even about your own neighborhood, the old Quad, and obviously a lot of the concerns with. A lot of the concern from the community or from the neighborhood has been directed towards trying to eliminate boarding houses, where typically the root of the problem is the behavior or poor behavior of, and I want to be very clear, some of the students.
Exactly.
A lot of great students. I think one of the problems though is that they feel that they can get away with that bad behavior.
Right.
Because historically we've seen that the police has issued more warnings than we think is appropriate. And you suggested having the university fund a full-time officer.
Right.
So, how do you see, as a chief of police, how do you make that happen? You can't force. Can you force the university to fund a full-time officer?
No, I'm sure I couldn't. It'd be nice to be able to, but I'm sure I couldn't. It would be a collaborative effort. I frankly, I think they do have the money. I think they could afford it, and again, with the perception being that their students are, running amok, for lack of a better term.
Yes.
That's their perception.
Yes.
So again, why wouldn't they want to help solve that problem? And I think they would want to. And I think it would go a long way to helping the neighbors think that the university is listening to them. And it's not just having an officer full-time. That's someone that could be a liaison with the school. Because you're right, the current policy of just giving warnings or, small fines.
Is that a policy that you want to change?
I think it doesn't work as effectively as if you held them responsible on campus. By that I mean, if you held, if there were problems off campus and you had a direct conduit to the administration so that they could hold their grades. If students knew that their off-campus behavior was going to affect their, grades, I think that would go a long way to solving some of their behavioral problems. And I think we need to have that close relationship. So even if I couldn't get the university to fund a full-time officer, but that would be still one of my goals. I would want to make sure that we had an administrator who that we could have maybe come out with us at nights and come out with us. And I know this has happened down in Southern California where they had problems, of similar nature, where, you go to break up a party and, the dean of students, for lack of a better term, is with you, and he says, hey, Jim, do you want to graduate? You need to knock this off. I think that would be much more of a deterrent than, a $250 fine for a first response violation. And I think once the word got out that there were severe, consequences, or potentially severe consequences, I think that would change a lot of the behavior in the neighborhoods.
All right, let's. We're going to switch gears here. Now, this is a question that came in. I got a lot of these questions came in. So, the person who's asking this question, I'm going to read it as is. Okay. Is stating that you're running on an anti-stadium platform. However, it is estimated that you have made approximately $50,000 in income from the 49ers in the stadium by working overtime, providing, security.
Right.
Some could say that your campaign is partially funded by the stadium because of that. Do you find that hypocritical?
No, I find it amusing. Yes, I work.
The question amusing.
Yes,
I
find it. Yeah,
okay.
I find the question amusing that they would say I'm hypocritical. The way the stadium works is we have Santa Clara officers that work overtime at the stadium. We also have special event officers that work. So special event officers are basically reserve officers who are sworn officers at other agencies, and they sign up to work at the stadium, and they wear our uniforms.
Is this the double badger program?
The double badger program,
okay.
Right. The official term is special event officer.
Okay.
Double badger sounds much better.
Okay.
But, so, yes, I work at the stadium. And I work at the stadium because I have to work at the stadium. We are always short for supervisors. They are always asking for supervisors to work at the event because one of the things we've always tried to do is make sure that there is Santa Clara supervisors, for the double badgers, so that the double badgers are not working alone. Because yes, they've had a lot of training, but they're still not Santa Clara officers. So we always try to make sure that the Santa Clara supervises the double badger officers. And so, yes, I have worked at the stadium. I have worked at the stadium many, many times.
And when you say that you have to go there, I mean it's not obviously a mandatory requirement.
Right.
This is what we were talking about earlier in terms of the way the arrangement is.
Right.
But you're saying that you have to work there in terms of because of the need for having Santa Clara supervisors.
Exactly.
Okay.
I mean, do I have, am I mandated to? No. But I feel a responsibility. I feel like I should be out there. And I have missed events, and that happens. I mean, you have other things that come up. But at the same time, I have missed a lot of personal events because I had to work at the stadium. I've missed birthday parties. I've missed camping trips. I've missed things. I've had to sacrifice things in order to work at the stadium. But that's the way our system is. And so I will work at the stadium. So I don't think I've funded my campaign. I haven't given, I donated $500 to myself just so that people would know that I'm invested in my, my account, but I am not self-funding my campaign. So I don't think I am using hypocritical about the issue.
So let's talk about Blupac. I mean, we already touched upon it earlier.
Right.
But one of the interesting things is that when you look at some of the other races that have been going on and the way Blupac has addressed those, for certain candidates who they are supporting or they are listing as quote unquote the good guys or gals,
right.
They also will list opponents of those folks as quote unquote bad for Santa Clara or people to watch. Right. So your opponent, again, without going into about your opponent, but he is listed on the website, but you're not.
Right.
So tell me a little bit about that, because that's kind of unique that somebody would be listed as somebody good for Santa Clara, but then their opponent would not be listed as somebody to watch, and that's quite unique. So tell me about that.
Yeah, and I don't, again, I don't understand, how the Blupac decided who's good for Santa Clara versus who's, people to watch. But when you look at it, I mean, like one of them, it's like there's one for Kathy Watanabe, and it says, Kathy Watanabe is not diversity, and it's just such it's like it just doesn't seem like that is relevant at all. And that's the kind of stuff that's on the Blupac site and on those mailers and on those text messages that are just just horrible. That is that's like national level politics coming down into little Santa Clara, and it's very disappointing. And I'm glad I'm not. I guess I'm glad I'm not a person to watch.
Well, at least in a bad way.
Yeah, at least in a bad way. I don't. As far as I know, my opponent hasn't been funded by them. But he is listed on their site, and it came up in the forum again that he was listed, and he said, well, yeah, he is good for Santa Clara, and so I won't go into that, but the the bottom line is,
everybody believes that they're good for Santa Clara,
anyways. Right.
But we're just back to the Blupac.
Yeah, but so on the Blupac, but I think like Rod Diridon was originally on the Blupac, and he requested to be removed, and I respect him for that, because when you look at what their message is, it's wrong. So I would encourage anybody that is listed as good for Santa Clara on the Blupac site, they should ask to have themselves removed, because that is not the politics that we want here in Santa Clara. I just don't see how you can look at that site and not see the
certainly
the
some of them have requested to be removed, but just for some reason or another, which none of us have any clue why or how. They haven't been. I mean, it's actually. I think the example you bring up with Rod is a unique one, but most of the other people, who have been requested to been removed, have not been. So I mean, certainly what they're doing is not illegal.
Right. No, it's not illegal.
Like it or hate it, based on Citizens United decision. It's a Supreme Court decision. It's not illegal, and certainly those who have received independent expenditures, I don't know how they would not receive it, because they're not in charge or paying for it.
Right.
So, but I mean, tell me about. I think you already talked about it. I mean, in terms of their behavior and how. Okay.
Right.
Well, there is obviously the report that just came out last week that indicates, and this is an interesting one, because some people are suggesting a connection. I don't like to suggest or perpetuate rumors. No matter how, but I do want to bring it up because some people have sent that to me, and it is an interesting thing, and I just want to get your thoughts on it. Again, this is not in the interest of perpetuating a rumor, but I do want to get your thoughts on it. And that is, I mean, you have support from a lot of police office POAs in the area. I mean, obviously Santa Clara supporting you. I mean, even just from looking at your website, you have Santa Clara, you have San Jose, Sunnyvale, Milpitas, all the police officer association. You have the Sunnyvale Public Safety Officer Association endorsement. You have Santa Clara County Deputy Sheriff's Association endorsement. You have San Francisco Deputy Sheriff's Association. Now, there was a report last week that San Francisco Police Officers Association, which is not in your endorsement list, that they provided $10,000 towards Blupac. And some speculate that the blue in Blupac, it refers to police, the men and women in blue. So obviously you don't have an endorsement from San Francisco Police Officers Association, but because of all of the other police officers association that have endorsed you, there are questions as to whether or not you have any connection to them, the San Francisco Police Officers Association.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, I haven't been endorsed by them. I don't even think I asked for their endorsement. The Deputy Sheriff's Association in San Francisco actually approached me. They have some special event officers, so they've worked with me and they know me personally. So when I was running for chief, they contacted me and said, and I asked for their endorsement because of that, because of the close working relationship we have. So yeah, I'm not associated to the Blupac, obviously. I've never heard that I was connected to it somehow. I heard the rumor about the San Francisco POA being associated to them or donating to them, and I don't know. I honestly don't know. I haven't seen it. I don't know. Did they make the donation? Has that been confirmed? Or
I haven't personally checked the financial form, but it was reported in the news, and I would assume that whoever reported it would have done their due diligence before publishing it.
Right.
No, it's not. It's in the news. It's not in a, as you can see, the rumor sites that are online.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Exactly. So I'm not sure exactly what
to make of that, or
I mean, I don't know.
Okay. All right. Let me see here, because I did ask some of these things out of order. So
right.
Okay. Talking about endorsements and support.
Mm-hmm.
And this is public because anybody can pull it up, and I encourage anybody who's interested to go and look at it.
Right.
As a candidate running for public office, all the candidates have to fill out what's called 460 forms, and these are the forms that indicate, who is donating to your campaign, and covers all the financial aspects of the campaign.
Uh-huh.
And it particularly, identifies the individuals who donate to the campaign.
Right.
And when you look at the 460 forms, again, we're not gonna talk about opponents here, but I do want to talk about kind of the environment or the sentiment that's being generated here.
Mm-hmm.
For when I look at your forms, I see that 31 officers, police officers, not sergeant, lieutenant, or anything like that, and 30 of those 31 are in Santa Clara.
Right.
And one dispatch individual in Santa Clara donated to you.
Right.
When I look at your opponent, in his 460 forms, he has donations from the police commander in Los Gatos. He's got it from the police commander in Sunnyvale, the chief in Los Gatos, the chief in Los Altos, the chief in Milpitas, sheriff and assistant sheriff in San Mateo, and a captain and an assistant chief here in Santa Clara.
Right.
So, again, without talking about your opponent, I see here a very clear dichotomy that when I look at your 460 forms, I see, rank and file police officers.
Right.
And a lot of them.
Mm-hmm.
And when I look at your opponent's 460 forms, I see chiefs and assistant chiefs or sheriffs of neighboring cities.
Right.
And the two that are from Santa Clara are management. Mm-hmm. Talk to me about that dichotomy, because this is a very interesting... It's a very interesting phenomena that I'm seeing here.
Yeah, and you're exactly right. And what I think is interesting is that I do have so much support from inside the department. And what's key is, I think it just says there are Santa Clara police officers, but actually 6 of those are lieutenants.
Oh, okay. It just says police.
It just says Santa Clara Police Department.
Yes.
So, but what's key is these are lieutenants who are part of the chief's management team. Mm. And they are supporting me. And not only are they supporting me, they are putting the money out knowing that their names are going to be out there. And
I mean, that's the 460 form. You see the person's name. They black out the address, but you see their name and their profession.
Right. And, my opponent actually made a comment that he would see who was financially supporting.
Let's not talk about opponents.
Right.
Yeah.
So what's key is that they are doing this. They are giving their money, not just their verbal support, but they're actually, giving money, knowing that their names are going to be public and that everyone's going to see that. And I think that's a, it's a huge boost to me, because they see such a need for change internally that they're willing to do that. They're willing to, potentially sacrifice any promotion opportunity they have in order.
Well, certainly, I mean, that would be retaliatory and it wouldn't be accepted anyways. I mean,
So that's why I think the support in the department. And so the chief has support from other chiefs. And
but doesn't that also say about, again, we're not, I want to maybe steer more towards the subject rather than the person. But I mean that does also indicate that there is a level of confidence from others who share that kind of a responsibility of being a chief, that they can put into the person that they see as being able to live up to that.
Right. And, the way I see it, unfortunately, is I had a conversation with Jeff Rosen, the district attorney.
Okay.
And we were talking about endorsements, and I was trying to ask for Jeff Rosen's endorsement. And he made a comment about when he ran for office way back, 8 years ago, I think. And when he ran for office, he went to the Police Chiefs Association, because the police chiefs have an association,
sure.
And the district attorney is part of that association. So the incumbent at the time, Dolores Carr, was part of their association. Mm. And so he went to the association for their endorsement, and he actually went to individual chiefs for endorsements. And basically the response he got was, sorry, we all stick together. All the chiefs stick together. We are not going to endorse you. We are going to endorse Dolores. And I think that's just a mindset that, unfortunately that group has, is that they are just going to stick together. And, that's what you see when you see the 460 forms. They are sticking together. So I think that's kind of what the dichotomy is. I think the people that know us best, that work with us individually on a daily basis, support me, where the police chief group sticks together and they support one another.
Okay. All right, there's a couple issues here. I'm going to lump the two questions together because there have been some conversations in the forums about changes that you see in the department that are happening now that to the lay person appears that they are happening because of the election. Do you see what I'm saying? So
yes.
Issues about staffing and how we've been at current levels of staffing, yet just recently there was announcements that they were going to fill, I think it was like 8 or 10 positions, and then there's going to be more to be filled in the new year. And the timing, obviously, very close to the election, gives people the feeling that it's happening because of the election. And there's obviously the traffic plan at the stadium with the Uber vehicles and whatnot, which is something that you have obviously went up and spoken at council. And the changes that are happening that people feel, or that the layperson may make an assumption that it's happening because of the election and the kind of discussions that are happening there. But both of those issues are things that have been, I guess you could say, in the pipeline or in the works for at least a year or maybe some time.
Right.
Maybe for each issue is different. So, I mean, how do you respond to people who feel that they are motivated by the election, or do you agree to that sentiment that they are motivated, or the changes that have been motivated by the election?
No, they are very much motivated by the election. I can go through those couple of examples you gave me. Go ahead. So when we started this campaign, and I talked about staffing levels and recruiting, there was one person assigned to recruiting, and I think right before the campaign really kicked off, they assigned a second person for a temporary year assignment. And then, once the campaign started going in earnest, they assigned another person, or they said to another person, oh, you're going to be in recruiting as well. So, what I was saying all along is we need to have a robust recruiting team to get all these people, because we have a lot of openings. And so there was a staffing study done recently. And
that staffing study was done before any election season or anything like that, right?
Exactly. So, but what the staffing study showed is that we could have 13 new officers. And I focus on the sworn officers. There were also other positions, non-sworn positions. Sure. I think it was like 24 positions total.
Sure.
But just focusing on the sworn officers.
Sure.
So there was 13 positions that we could hire right now. But we're not doing it just because we're not putting the resources necessary. So that's something I would do, is put more resources to the problem.
But isn't that something, and I don't want to, you continue talking, I'm not trying to cut you off, right? I'm just a part of the conversation here. Isn't the appropriation of funds a council issue, not necessarily? I mean, obviously the department will allocate whatever appropriation the council approves for them, but I mean, you're not going to take away, for example, from training to go and hire new officers.
You're exactly right.
Okay.
But we have the money. I mean, the money is there. And
who has the money? You mean the city?
The city has the money, and the department has the money. The department, so we got approval for the 13 officers. So we could have had all 13 officers in this budget. But, my chief decided to split it and do 6 this year and 7 next fiscal year. And the reasoning at the time was we can't hire that many officers that fast.
That may be a legitimate reason.
But the bottom line is we could try, because we could put more resources to it. Instead of having one person in recruiting and one part-time and, now we're going to put another person in there. You should have a team of like 4 that is actively going out recruiting. And speaking of recruiting, another idea that I had that I, again, was talking about during the campaign was that we should go recruiting at military bases when they have the outgoing, job fairs, because we have a lot of great military. Well, sure enough, now we went down and did recruiting at Miramar, I think it was. So we actually did do that. And I take it almost as a compliment, because obviously I have some good ideas and they're being implemented as we speak. But yeah, I really think that if this campaign wasn't happening, we would have stayed at the status quo, where we would have kept hiring people, but only enough to offset our losses. And we never would have gotten those extra 13 bodies that we should have right now. And then the other example you gave was the Uber plan, the traffic plan. Well, again, I don't want to go into my opponent, but, his plan was to do what the 49ers wanted to do, which was just have the cars on the street. Have the cars do the pickup on Great America north of Tasman, which completely disrupted the traffic plan. Because you ended up with, instead of, 100 Uber cars, they were having 300, 500 Uber cars, which would go through neighborhoods and stuff because, everybody's trying to get their pickup and things like that. And it just created a mess, which is why I said we should do what, we did during the Super Bowl, which is give them a dedicated lot.
So I want to challenge you on this because it's not a new idea. It was done during the Super Bowl.
You're right. It's not a new idea. The difference is when we did it during the Super Bowl, the Super Bowl committee paid for it because you had to rent the lot out.
Yeah.
Now, with the 49ers partnership with Uber, they did not want to rent out a parking lot because that costs money.
Sure.
So for them, if they were on a street, well, that's free. Sure. So you can have your partnership.
Well, they don't have to do anything.
They don't have to do anything. Yeah. It's just like, hey, show up here. This is where your pickup is. But that doesn't work. So what I would have done differently is said to the 49ers, no, this is not going to work. We are not.
And that would be within your authority as a chief to direct where, to dictate where traffic could and can't be.
Right, exactly. And I think that needed to be done. And again, I don't think it was being done. Luckily, the stadium unit went up, met with the 49ers, and got them to agree to use the parking lot. But again, I don't think that would have happened had this campaign not been going on.
Okay, there's a couple more things here, and then we'll be done. Let's talk about the audit. Okay. Because you just talked about it a little bit. So, you've publicly stated this was even before the audit had begun, or before the community meetings or the ad hoc committee meetings have been around. And even when you look at the Chamber PAC interview, you publicly stated it there as well, and that was back, I believe, in August.
Right.
That you're certain that general fund monies were used by the police department, which, as you know, was confirmed by the audit committee, and that the current chief knew about it. So the auditor, as I said, they have found violations of Measure J. They haven't specifically indicated by which departments.
Right.
Not yet. But he's also said that he hasn't seen any evidence of willful violations by department heads, and this is the audit is still underway. So, but he's saying as far as what he understands right now, or what he has determined right now, is that there haven't been willful violations. And you've publicly stated that the current chief knew about it, which maybe it's not willful, but at least it wasn't. It's not what has been represented.
Right.
So, couple things. When the audit is complete, which we know is not going to be complete till the end of the year or beginning of next year.
Right. Tell
me, what does an elected chief, Pat Nikolai, do?
Well, what I would do is make sure that any monies that were inappropriately spent come back to the city. Now, as the elected chief, I don't know that I would have any influence on that, except for my voice of basically saying, hey, this money needs to come back. But more importantly, what I could do as police chief is advocate for more money from the 49ers to do NFL football games. And that's something that could have happened after the first year, but it didn't. Now we're in the third year, and again, there's another opportunity to get more money. And I think it's very obvious that we are spending more money than the 49ers are giving us. And those extra monies could be coming back to the city. So just to clarify, that's not a Measure J violation. the Measure J violation is the on-duty resources being used and not billed to the city. So there's two problems. Billed to the stadium. So there's two problems. So the second problem is the one I think the police chief could actually factor into it. And all it would take is looking back and seeing how much more money we need and getting the appropriate money from the 49ers. Again, they're in a business. They want to, make money. So the lowest amount they can spend is what they're going to try to do. We need to advocate for it. And we could advocate for it right now. So, for example, after the first year, what I would have done is gone back to the table, and if the 49ers said, no, we're not going to renegotiate, then I would have said, okay, well, under this current $170,000, this is the public safety that I can provide you. I can make sure that everybody at the stadium is safe. Protect all the fans, the referees, the players, everything. But I don't have enough money to do the traffic plan. So you're going to have to do the traffic plan on your own.
But what if they said no? I mean, at the end of the day, the responsibility of safety of our community and the stadium and everything sits with you.
Exactly.
As a chief.
And we would have protected everyone in the stadium and made sure everyone was safe.
But even the traffic plan is still part of your responsibility.
The traffic plan, yes, it's a convenience to the not the residents, to the stadium goers.
Well, it's a convenience to everybody.
Well, it's a convenience to everybody. But the bottom line is it would be a moot point because all it would take was one football game where all the fans had to sit in traffic for 3 or 4 hours, and I guarantee you the 49ers would have paid more money, without a doubt. So that's something I think the chief could advocate for and have a powerful, voice to be heard. And again, we also need to make sure that we are not spending general fund money like we are now. We need to stop it. And we need to make sure...
Let me interrupt you 1 second because it's just about to cut. Hold on.
Got it.
Finish your
No
sentence.
problem.
Sorry about that.
We need to... there was a report in the paper that we are using on-duty resources at the stadium. So we need to stop that. Because, again, that's another problem that should be stopping. So those are changes that, as chief, I would make.
Okay. Well, I want to ask one more question here. Because, again, you had publicly stated that the current chief knew about it. And as of right now, like we mentioned, again, I don't want to start any rumors, but as of right now, the audit has found no willful violation by any department head. By the way, this is not just about police. This is about all departments. Right?
Exactly.
So, if the audit findings, when it's complete, indicate that there was not a willful violation of Measure J by either all department heads, but more importantly, police.
Right.
What does a Pat Nikolai do if he isn't chief, or if he is chief?
Well, I think the big concern for me is, the statements. And again, I don't want to go. I can't go into what my opponent said. But if my opponent says there is no general fund money being used, and the audit shows that there is, well, there's a big problem there.
No, but I want to differentiate here between general fund money being used because there wasn't clear directive or communication on the procedure or process of how to build back the stadium, versus a willful violation.
Yes. So the point I'm trying to make is, when I say willful violation,
when you publicly stated it, you didn't say that there was willful. I just want to be very clear. You said that he knew about it.
Exactly.
Not that it was willful.
That's the key difference. You're exactly right, because willful is someone department head telling officers to fraudulent, mark
that's
their
willful.
time cards.
We're not talking about that.
And that's not what I'm talking about either. But it did happen, and it was happening, and my opponent said it wasn't, and that is wrong. And that's my concern, is if the department head knew about it and publicly said that it wasn't happening.
No, but there's a difference. I still want to differentiate here, because there's a difference between well, I knew that we were billing things in XYZ manner.
Right.
Okay, and because of the directive was unclear, it in my perspective, it seemed okay. Now, the audit is complete, and in the auditor's perspective, it's not okay, and they've now clarified the directive. So I'll comply with the new directive, even though it didn't appear that would be the right way to do it when we were doing it back then.
Right.
So again, there's a very clear distinction between a willful or versus knowing about it. And there's also a very clear difference between knowing about it and turning a blind eye.
Right.
So now let's, again, hypothetical. If the audit comes back, and by the way, the audit hasn't indicated that the violations happened from any specific department.
No, actually, the last meeting they did say it was the police department.
Okay, then maybe I missed that part. So, tell me, in the scenario where the auditor finds out that, or determines, or reports that it was an honest mistake.
Right.
What does a Pat Nikolai do? I mean, is there an apology warranted, or is there, or is it, tell me what's going on?
Yeah, I guess my concern is that, and again, I have to mention my opponent. He has publicly said that there were no mistakes and that there is no general fund money used at the stadium. So he has made, very strong statements that this did not happen, and it is happening, and it has been shown to be happening. So the big issue is,
but if it gets shown that it happened and it was an honest mistake, again, nobody can know anybody's personal intentions,
right.
but that the auditor finds that it was a mistake that even you as a chief of police could have made.
Right.
So in that case, are your statements that you have made in the manner that you have made them, in that case, would that warrant an apology? Or do you don't feel that the statements that you've made have been, I guess you could say, in an abrasive way or attacking way that would necessarily mean an apology?
No, because I've never said he willfully, did anything wrong. I just said we have been doing this and it has to stop. And I think that, yes, he could have said, yes, there are issues we're looking at. But when you make a blanket statement, there are no mistakes, and my officers are naive for thinking there is mistakes, and now the auditor says that the officers were in fact right, I believe my opponent should be making the apology.
Okay, last question. There are four measures on the ballot that are specific to Santa Clara.
Yes. O,
P, Q, and R.
Right.
We won't talk about most of them because they're not. I mean, you may have a personal opinion on them, and that's fine, but not relevant to the role of chief of police.
Right.
There is one of the measures, Measure Q, which does impact one of the roles of, or impact the chief of police in a certain scenario, and that's how an elected official or what happens if an elected official leaves or resigns or, God forbid, passes away before their term is over. And the method of appointment or election of backfilling that vacancy. And because in Santa Clara the chief of police is elected, that responsibility also fits within the purview of that measure. So, in the current rule, the way it is that if the elected official leaves their position or resigns, or for whatever reason is not in that position anymore, that within 30 days the council has the opportunity to appoint somebody within 30 days with only a simple majority.
Right.
In the case of a chief of police, that simple majority would be 4 votes out of 7.
Right.
And if they can't come to an agreement, or they can't appoint somebody, then, or they choose not to for whatever reason, then it goes to an election. And the current charter doesn't specify that it goes to a special election, that you have to call a special election, or that it just goes to the next general election. The new proposal for which Measure Q brings forward is that it says, if somebody leaves and there is a desire to appoint somebody within 30 days, it can be done, but it requires a supermajority. Not a simple majority,
right? Which
the supermajority is defined with a fractional thing, and I'm not sure if it's 5 out of 7 in the case of a chief of police, or 6 out of 7. But in either case, it fosters the desire to pick somebody who is more of a consensus builder rather than a divisive candidate, because you have to get everybody on council, almost everybody on council, to agree. And that it also requires that if the person resigns, that they go up to election from the general public at the next general election. So obviously, if they're in the second half of their term, they're already going to be up for election anyways.
Right.
But if they're in the first half of the term, they don't play out the entire term. They only play it out until the next general election.
Right.
So I want to get your thoughts on that, because we've seen in the past chief of police resign and there be an appointment. It was in the end of the term, so it wouldn't necessarily click that rule. But what are your thoughts on this?
I don't see that there's a bad side to that. I think it's good in that you do look for a supermajority. So you're right, it's not a divisive candidate. So you don't have, someone that can curry favor with 4 candidates and all of a sudden, they can get appointed. And it's not just for the chief, but also for a council position as well. So you would have a strong support for a candidate, and having the people make the ultimate choice, again, I don't see a downside to that. So instead of having to wait, with an interim chief or an interim council person for 2.5, 3 years, you would just have it for, half a year or a year, and then the people get to choose. I don't see a downside to that. I think it's a good thing.
So you're in support of the new Measure Q. You'd vote yes on that one?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm out of questions. I hope you had fun with this, but I will allow you to give everybody closing thoughts. I mean, again, no time limit, free form, as you like.
All right. Well, I appreciate everyone who's listened. I did not think I was going to go this long, and I'm very surprised that it did, but I hope it was a good conversation, and I hope you took something away from this. One of the things I've said at the close of my forums is, an educated voter is a powerful person. If you're watching this, if you're doing your research, you're becoming an educated voter. And I really think that an educated voter will support me in November. And I think when you look at my platform, you look at the people that are supporting me and the message that I'm giving, I think you'll see. I have my website there. You can see that I have very poor whiteboard skills. But it's Nikolai2016.com. So please go to my site, get some more information. And I also have a Facebook page, which my 18-year-old daughter was very excited that I got finally after all these years. So please take some time to do research on all the candidates, because I think you'll find that there are some strong differences, and I really believe that my message will resonate with you. And thank you very much.
Yeah, you bet, Pat. All right, well, with that, we are done with this hot seat interview. As I've always been saying in all of the videos that I've been doing, if you like this video, if you find these useful, and you want to know whenever I post something new, go ahead and click like or follow on my Facebook page, and then Facebook will automatically send you a notification whenever I post something new or go live in a new video feed or whatever. So again, I hope this has been useful for you. I think we have a few more, and I know this isn't live, so it probably doesn't matter that I'm saying this, but I have a few more on the hot seat interviews that I have lined up with other candidates. But we have at this point concluded the interviews for Chief of Police. So I actually, as soon as I can get this video uploaded, I will post both of those, and I will reserve posting the remaining interviews that I've already completed until all of the candidates who have agreed to do those interviews for each of those roles or offices are done. That way there isn't any perceived advantage or disadvantage of who went first or last. So anyways, I'm rambling a little bit here, and we've already spent quite a bit of time. So again, thank you so much, Pat, for sitting down with me, and I'm sure everybody who's watching is going to enjoy this, and then we'll catch you guys with the next video. So thanks again.